Tonight, I am going to talk about leading a meaningful life, how to recover from adversity and cultivate well-being. In previous classes, I've talked about the foundation for tonight's talk, how to work with issues that we bring with us from earlier in our lives, and how to have a good foundation by contemplating the four ordinary foundations. So we all want to be happy during our daily lives, and being peaceful is the foundation for happiness. If we haven't trained our mind, we really can't be peaceful anywhere. That very quickly something will happen and we will be distracted, we will be upset, we will start feeling we have desires that need to be fulfilled and so forth. But if we have trained our mind, then we can withdraw from harmful behavior and our mind is peaceful and at ease. This includes being withdrawn from negative emotions and negative states of mind. Many people thought that I had a stressful job at the prison, whether it be other employees there or just people on the outside that I knew. But quite honestly, I would generally leave happier than when I arrived. And it was by maintaining mental stability and avoiding negative states of mind. I'm not saying I didn't have bad days. I did. But generally, I felt that what I was doing was meaningful, and I felt peaceful and happy doing what I was doing. It is renunciation that is the source of peace and happiness, renouncing the causes of agitation, the causes of negative states of mind, and the causes of negative emotions. And we can do things by cultivating positivity also. There is a Tibetan saying that I heard from a middle-aged Tibetan woman, and it might be just like grandmother's wisdom. I talked to Lama Karma about this, and he had never heard it before, but it is, if you have a warm place in your heart for yourself, you will be comfortable wherever you go. So part of this is cultivating a warm place in our heart for ourselves. And as we progress on the path, we find that we have more strength and more ability to withdraw from negative behavior and negative emotions, perhaps than we thought was possible. By doing that, by cultivating these abilities and these strengths, this keeps us from being pulled down by what's going on in the world, going on around us, yet still remain in the world. We don't have to go off and isolate to a retreat in the woods or cave in the mountains. We can be in the world with other people, people that are confused. And while we are there, we can actually uplift other people and lead a good life. And obviously, this is what Naropa is training everybody to do, to go out into the world and lead a good life and make a difference in people's lives. So we can train our minds to encourage these positive states of mind that encourage inner peace and happiness, well-being, and resilience. Resilience very simply means how quickly you bounce back from a negative experience or a series of negative experiences. So compassion for oneself is, as I said, renouncing the causes of suffering. Love for oneself is encouraging the causes of happiness for oneself. This is very different from the self-indulgence, this encouraging ourselves to be happy. Self-indulgence actually just increases suffering in the long run. Love and compassion is closely related to a positive self-image. Here is a quote by Traleg Kabang Rinpoche. Healthy self-image is accommodating, it is forgiving, it permits, it allows. It does not demand perfection from us. Perfection is something that we aspire to. It is being gentle with oneself, warts and all, accepting all aspects of oneself, forgiving one's failures and defects, and accepting that we can sometimes make mistakes and fail. So it's good to remember that, have a positive self-image, make allowances for your imperfections and your mistakes, but then keep going on and work with them. So a positive self-image is joined with giving yourself space to accept yourself, to forgive yourself, to accommodate ourselves. And this is an excellent foundation for navigating life. The space that you're giving yourself is room to maneuver, room to let things calm down before reacting, rather than just doing something when things get tense or when an urge comes up. But we still do want to grow and improve. I am a woodworker. I like working with wood. And this is one thing I learned a long time ago. And this applies, I think, to anyone's life. And that is a professional or a craftsman, maybe that's a better word. A craftsman works with their mistakes. An amateur gives up and perhaps blames the tool or the wood or whatever else it is that you're working with. It isn't a matter of being free of mistakes. It is working with them because you're going to make mistakes. The nature of samsara is impermanence. Pleasant circumstances vanish, unfavorable ones appear, then they frequently disappear. Usually not as quickly as we would like them, and our pleasant circumstances don't last as long as we would like them. But this is the way samsara is. Impermanence is really the basis. So I think it was in the first talk that I gave, I talked about the 5 unrealistic expectations we have of samsara. And when they're not met, our negative emotions arise. I'll go over them very, very briefly here. The first is that I am the most important person in the room, and it's a pretty big room, and I take this room with me wherever I go. The next one is I should be respected just because of who I am. I don't have to earn the respect of other people, but other people have to earn my respect. They have to be worthy of my respect. The third is others should live up to my expectations. Maybe even they should know my expectations without me telling them what my expectations are. You should just know. The fourth one is I shouldn't be harmed in any way. It could be anything. It could be stuck in traffic. This shouldn't be happening to me. I shouldn't have to wait in line at the checkout at the store. I just had a snafu with insurance billing that took a lot of time and work to resolve. Thinking like, well, this should be going like that every time. We shouldn't have these problems. The fifth one is my favorite, and that is life should be fair, and I'm the Supreme Court. I decide what's fair. So we cling to these, and when our expectations aren't met, negative emotions arise, small problems become big, and it seems like adversity follows us like our shadow. But we can learn to navigate these ups and downs in life with a sense of being grounded, a sense of being able to swiftly recover from these difficulties and adverse circumstances. This is called very simply resiliency, and it's a learned skill. A resilient person understands that blame is a problem. So is looking back at the past. Resilience looks for solutions, works with mistakes, and is flexible. Thomas Edison was working on inventing the light bulb for a long time without success. And a lot of people knew that he was working on a light bulb without success. This might be an urban myth, but supposedly someone asked him, how does it feel to have so many failures? And he answered, I have not failed 10,000 times. I have successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work. And he eventually succeeded. So a sense of well-being is important too. Feeling comfortable with being yourself, being where you are. This healthy self-image is the basis of well-being. And again, this is not blowing up your ego and being arrogant. It's just feeling good about who you are, recognizing that you have Buddha nature and that this cannot be destroyed, altered. You can't lose it. It's always there. Another point is that we all have experiences. Life takes on more meaning when we have the long view rather than what's going up and down, up and down, up and down during the day or during the week. That if we take on a longer view, these ups and downs aren't as big a problem. Mindfulness plays a big role in this. When we are mindful, there is room for things to arise, and yet we see there are choices that we can make. We don't have to be governed by impulse. And by using our inherent wisdom when we're making choices, we take responsibility for our choices and we learn from our choices and our life settles down. We have less stress. We're more comfortable with ourselves. We're more comfortable with other people. On top of that, other people are more comfortable being around us. So here are some skills that can encourage us to go in this positive direction and then faults to avoid. The first is mindfulness, just paying attention. Here's a quote from Ashanti Deva. Those who wish to keep a rule of life must guard their minds in perfect self-possession. Without this guard upon the mind, no discipline can ever be maintained. So the rule of life is our practice, taming our mind. And with that, our mind becomes under our control. Discipline can have a negative connotation in the West, but in Buddhism, what discipline means very simply is avoiding things that cause harm to yourself and avoiding things that cause harm to other people. It isn't punishing yourself. It's just avoiding doing things that cause you pain and suffering, which really is quite good. Another aspect of discipline is doing things that are positive, that benefit you and benefit other people. So a disciplined mind causes us to avoid harming ourselves and other people. And if we do something non-virtuous, then very simply confess it and purify it. It doesn't have to be a complicated confession. Gyalwang Karmapa has even said, I think it's in his Interconnected book, if you want to, just go out and look at a tree and confess to the tree. Of course, it would be better if you put your guru in front of you, but just let it out. Admit it that I did this wrong. I regret having done it, and I want to avoid doing it in the future. That's much more helpful than trying to deny that you did it, avoid thinking about it or thinking it didn't matter. On the other hand, you don't want to be getting down on yourself and over focusing either. So confess it and then let it go. So mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening. When we meditate, we pay attention to the breath. When we go through the day, mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening. It's a tool, it's a technique. Mindfulness helps us focus on what's happening, and we can also take breaks, you might say, and appreciate what we have done earlier in the day. There is nothing wrong with taking a break and just looking back at what you have done and feeling good about having accomplished something, if you accomplish something. So we can appreciate what's going on in our lives if we apply mindfulness, and appreciation brings contentment. This is a great source of natural wealth. Money can't buy it. With this contentment, well-being will naturally arise within us. We don't have to search for it somewhere else. Without mindfulness, it's very difficult for contentment to arise. What happens is we get very focused on our work, but then we get home in the evening and we're not satisfied. We feel that we're missing something. And This is an indication that we need to apply mindfulness more during the day. We get lost in our thoughts, we get carried away, and our thoughts are endless. We can think endlessly about things that we would like to have, or about things that have happened to us that we didn't like, and on and on and on. But with mindfulness and appreciation, we can be more centered on what is actually happening. When I was a prison chaplain, I would lead a meditation class once a week, and I encouraged the inmates to meditate in their rooms. And one inmate became very diligent in his meditation practice. One day he came to the meditation class and he told me, "There are many people suffering here, and it's not just the inmates, it's the staff too." And that's a sign of mindfulness working, that he was no longer so concerned about his own suffering. He realized that there were other people that were suffering much more than him, including the staff. This had opened his mind up to see more clearly. And this is how meditation works. It allows our mind to settle down, and then during post-meditation, we see things a little more clearly. So mindfulness is a very, very important skill to learn. When we are mindful of the breath, we have this opportunity to become aware of the experience of breathing, which is actually a very good experience. This is happening all the time, but we usually don't notice it. Yawang Karmapa explained it this way once. If you think about it, not when you're meditating, but when you're not meditating, when we are inhaling, we're inhaling oxygen that is produced by plants and only plants. And when we exhale, we're exhaling carbon dioxide that the plants can use. And so we're in this interdependent relationship with plants. And he says, quote, "How wondrous." There's a lot of wonder going on in the world all the time if we open up to it and are mindful. The second point is confidence in our Buddha nature, trusting yourself. You know you make mistakes, but you have confidence that you have the ability to work with whatever arises. Courage is a component of this. You have confidence and trust in the teachings. You have confidence and trust in your guru. You have confidence and trust in yourself. This can go a long way. Mingyur Rinpoche, I heard him say this, that when he was young, his father would tell him, if you're walking on a path in Nepal and you come to a stone wall, the first thing you do is throw your backpack over it, because then you've got to get over the wall. You're highly motivated to get over the wall. The motivation comes from having confidence in yourself. Doubt is an obstacle in spiritual activity, and it's just as much an obstacle in mundane activity. This goes back to having this positive self-image. The next point is to have a positive outlook in life, that remember, everybody, including you, wants to be happy. And if we can carry that into our daily encounters with others, this can really help realize that even this person that is maybe a troublemaker, they really want to be happy. They just don't know how. So from a Buddhist point of view, our habits of thinking are very important. Positive thinking is actually easier than negative thinking. Positive thinking generates more well-being and more positive thoughts. And positive thinking allows you to bounce back quickly from adversity and negativity, whereas negativity just makes things worse. You can think of one negative thing after another, after another, after another, after another, endlessly. And by the time you're thinking of all of that, you're exhausted and you don't have any energy to do anything. My own personal experience with depression is that it takes more effort to maintain negative thoughts and emotions than it does positive ones. And you have to be doing it all the time because, of course, it's an artificial state and it's full of holes. And so you have to continually plug the holes with more negative thoughts. Suspicion and lack of trust are another negative direction that you want to avoid. I don't have to tell you, but lack of trust is an epidemic in the world today, that there's all kinds of conspiracy theories, all kinds of confusion, and it leads to a sense of loneliness, fear, anger, and frequently people that spread distrust are actually trying to manipulate other people. So avoid distrust. It doesn't mean that you have to believe everything. Don't go off the deep end, let's put it that way. And it's real easy to do that on the internet today. So avoid the distrust. Thinking positively, actually, it will lead to having fewer hardships in your life. The positive attitude doesn't have to be 100% reality. Again, it helps create more well-being and things go better when you are feeling good. The next is joy, diligence, and purpose. If we take a broader, long-term view of our lives, we're less reactive and we have a more meaningful life. If we go through life with our habitual patterns binding us, controlling us, then we're always dealing with the latest problem. I like to compare that to running on habit is a bit like having your car on cruise control, where you're really not paying much attention. Maybe you're even talking on the phone. You got the volume on your sound system cranked way up, but you're missing everything. So we can use wisdom as skillful means and the actions of our body, speech, and mind to engage with what's happening right now. And this again leads to more purpose and meaningful lives, more joy, more enthusiasm, and others respond favorably to us when we behave this way. Here's a Karmapa quote: "We can each live a purposeful life if we have spent our time doing something beneficial for ourselves and others. At the very least, we need to find a way to lead our lives joyfully. But if we do the opposite, what a shame. If we only create misery, we have wasted our lives. What's more, all the trouble that others have gone through to feed and clothe us becomes pointless." The next point is generosity, appreciation, and gratitude. Generosity is the first paramita or transcendent virtue, and this takes us to the other shore when combined with the other paramitas. When we think about ourselves, it's common to see what we don't have and not see what we do have. But giving to others reverses this thinking. When we don't understand all the effort and the work behind the things that we buy, consume, and enjoy, or try to enjoy, we're missing the whole point and we're not getting nearly the enjoyment that we could. I like to use the example of a child at home opens up a refrigerator and it's full of food. I remember myself doing this. I remember my son doing this. And then, Mom, there's nothing to eat in the house because there wasn't leftover frozen pizza. Well, we actually have an incredible amount of generosity that we have received from other people. One of the snack foods that I like, roasted nuts. And I bought a jar of Planters roasted mixed nuts, and I read the label. The first thing that surprised me was that the company that owns Planters is located in Austin, Minnesota, which is a small little town. It's Hormel. They make Spam. We all know what Spam is, but there's the original Spam. And then it had the contents and it listed the countries of origin. And of course, most of the nuts are in tropical or semi-tropical areas of these roasted nuts. Vietnam, Indonesia, Brazil, and a number of other countries. Just by buying that jar of roasted nuts, I'm touching people all over the world that were growing these nuts, picking them, processing them, packaging them, putting them on a container to go to the United States where they would be processed more. And eventually I got them. So anything that we use, it's a global economy and we're touching people all over the world. And those people have families, they need food, clothing, and shelter. They spend money, they affect other people. We are all interconnected. And speaking of pizza, here's another story that I like to tell. So you go have a good spaghetti dinner. I'm going to switch here to another Italian dinner. Well, you have it on a porcelain plate. And porcelain was invented in China over 1,000 years ago. It wasn't until the 1700s that it came to the West. And it came to the West through some Jesuit monk stealing the intellectual property. Then noodles. I Googled this recently, and they had found a 5,000-year-old bowl of noodles in China somewhere. So the plate, Chinese, that's why you have China cabinets for your fine china. Noodles are Chinese. The spaghetti sauce, the tomato sauce. Well, tomatoes came from Peru originally. So what's Italian about it? We have this interconnection, and we don't see this unless we look more deeply. And we can learn to appreciate how much other people do and what has happened in the past that we're benefiting from. And this leads to gratitude. And one of the slogans of the 7 Points of Mind Training is be grateful to everyone. Gratitude brings happiness. The next is simplicity. Usually we try to find happiness in complexity. We work very hard, we make money, we spend, we go vacation, and it leads to unhappiness. With simplicity, it's easier to access our happiness. We can pay attention to things that are very ordinary, that are usually overlooked and not appreciated. Mindfulness works this way. I used to Saturday program in the prisons, and we would have a mindful meal there in prison. All I would do is I would say, we're eating in silence, no talking. And I would ring the singing bowl every so often and tell them, when you hear that, quit eating. And when you can't hear it anymore, resume eating. And I would strike the bowl about 4 times during the meal. That was all I did in terms of instructions. Then afterwards, I would have a discussion. One man said this was the best prison meal I ever ate. I promise you, prison meals are not that good. But he actually enjoyed it. And I would also hear things like this apple, talking about how delicious the apple tasted. These little things in life that we are experiencing all the time can be a great source of joy. There's a saying, take time to smell the flowers. When we start paying attention to the details, we start seeing things that we have missed before. You may have read a book, a Buddhist book, years ago, and then you turn back to it and you read it again, and all of a sudden you say, oh, I didn't see that before. I missed that. You're paying more attention. You've gained a little more wisdom over the years. Definitely, green space is important. I don't think I have to tell you that out there in Colorado, but it's excellent to spend some time in nature, just enjoying nature, going for a walk, sitting on a rock, just enjoying being out. The next point is working with our negative emotions with mindfulness. Recognize there's a difference between you and your emotions, that you are not your emotions. This is a very, very important point to make. If we can realize that, and meditation is crucial in being able to realize that, we can then watch an emotion rather than take it on as an identity. We can watch a painful experience. It doesn't have to be the only thing that's going on. If we cultivate mindfulness, we can direct our mind to another object like the breath or any object. We gain power over the emotion rather than the emotion having power over us. If it's possible, do a little bit of analysis and help dismantle the solidity of the emotion. Why am I feeling this right now? How did it arise? Does it have parts? Put some distance between you and the emotion. This can make a very, very big difference in working with strong and negative emotions. I talked about resiliency before, and now here it comes up again. And as I said, this is how quickly a person can recover from adversity or a stressful experience. this is not a practice so much as just a measure of our ability to experience adversity and recover, to return to our previous level of well-being. And it's actually possible to not only return to your previous level of well-being, but gain from it and be in a better place than you were before the adversity arose. There's a book called Bouncing Forward that kind of gets at this. I think the Western term is post-traumatic growth, that when you experience some extreme adversity, not only does the resilient person return to where they were before, but they can actually grow and learn from the experience. If we have that attitude, these adverse experiences become less adverse. We start seeing them in terms of opportunities and possibilities. Next is practicing with others. When we practice in a community, everybody benefits. In a community, you share your joys and sorrows, and this is beneficial. Just being in the presence of others is beneficial. I've had a number of people talk to me recently, not necessarily about themselves, but talking about the loneliness in the world. There was a person that stopped by today, and she was talking about her father, that's because of COVID, he really has been isolating, and she felt that he was really suffering from that isolation. So when we practice together, we all benefit from being in the presence of other people. Also, if you are practicing with, let's say, to pick a number out of the air, 10 people, you accumulate 10 times as much merit as you would if you were practicing alone, because you accumulate the merit of every person in the room practicing with you. That gives you more to dedicate to continue here. If you haven't trained your mind, you won't be peaceful anywhere. It kind of sums up what I've been saying. If you've trained your mind, you have withdrawn somewhat from negative behavior, you're at ease, and you are peaceful in most places. Peaceful, happy mind comes with renunciation and the causes of agitation, negative states of mind, and negative emotions. Comes from cultivating positivity, from that warm place in your heart. And this allows you to not be pulled down in the world when we have the opportunity to uplift other people. So I've got a few more points here to make. There are positive emotions that have mental states, and I'm going to go through these mental states. It's good to think about these. So in the Abhidharma, there are 11 mental factors that give rise to positive emotions. Some of these I've talked about already. This is kind of dividing up the pie in a different way. Confidence and trust is one. When we have distrust, we look at conspiracy theories, like I mentioned, and the people who spread them are unhappy. They see enemies everywhere, suspicion, anger, unhappiness. It becomes very difficult to have any positive emotions. So we have to learn to trust those things that won't let us down, which of course is the Dharma. And we can relate to our own ability to overcome problems and let go of thoughts like, I always fail. Instead, develop some trust and some intelligent trust in yourself. The second is self-respect. Also included in this is shame, which might sound a little bit contrary, as opposed to shamelessness, not caring at all about what you do or how it affects other people. So being careful, respecting yourself, respecting other people, being sufficiently self-aware of your actions, the thoughts that you're having, how it affects your behavior, and so forth. Then is conscious self-assessment, which means to witness your own conduct, your motivation, your intentions, your indulgences, your non-virtuous behavior, and so forth. Assess this and then lead yourself in a good direction. Rather than beat yourself up for where you have failed, be motivated to go in a more positive direction. Non-obsessiveness is the next mental factor, and that is We try to grasp and fixate on things, but if we can see that, we can refrain from it, and we become less reactive. Our responses become more open to whatever arises. This creates more space, and this leads to more joy and happiness. Craving weakens, dissatisfaction weakens, our fixations, mental addictions, and so forth all weaken. And things that are common here that I'm talking about would be food, social media, alcohol, sex, material goods, even fixation on how bad you are. Meditation is a good remedy for all of this. The next is non-hatred. We can easily get into a fight or flight mode. We need to develop space for things to arise without an immediate need for response. A negative mindset we need to avoid. If we can avoid that, the emotions won't arise, the negative emotions. And wisdom has a chance of entering. And then happiness and contentment will follow. Non-deludedness. We need to understand our fundamental delusional state, that our sense of self, I, me, mine, and how it colors our experience. This allows us, you might say, an easy way out in terms of denial and evading things that cause unhappiness and negative thoughts. But if we can see this, this really opens up our minds and our hearts to happiness and positive emotions. Energetically diligent is the next one. This is alertness, resilience, and responding swiftly in a positive way, not sluggishly. Sometimes it's good to take some time to respond, but in other cases, it's good to have a swift response before it arises. If you start feeling anger developing, that's when you want to respond to it quickly, because the stronger it gets, the more difficult it is to deal with anger. I will tell you something that I do sometimes. I will write an email and then not send it and wait a day to read it, maybe even a week to read it. Then frequently I delete it. It's always good to give a little bit of space when you maybe are feeling a little edgy. Awareness is the next point. If you look, you might see something. If you listen, you might hear something. So this is very important in all positive emotions. We see things more clearly. We get a more accurate overall picture of what's going on rather than a very focused on one particular thing. This doesn't have too much to do with what I just said, but this popped into my mind. It was a conversation I overheard between two people that worked together. I didn't work with them. It was in a restaurant. The one said, told him, I don't understand why you don't understand me. This is where we really get hung up in ego and our own sense of pride and egotism. And maybe it is better for that person to understand the other person rather than get the other person to understand them. So conscientiousness is physical and mental friendliness, generating a positive and friendly attitude towards oneself and towards others. Become friends with yourself. Remind yourself that we are all interdependent, and it's important how we treat other people and how we treat ourselves. Equilibrium here is the next one. This is a feeling of being grounded and underlying stability. Positive emotions have physical feelings, joy, upliftedness, are accompanied by underlying stability. You don't get swept away by these experiences. And then nonviolence or non-harming. We have this attitude of we're not going to intentionally cause harm to ourselves or to other people. Even if you become angry, you remain committed to non-harm. And it's impossible to be positive without this attitude. I will wind up this part of the talk by saying, pay attention to your moods. A trick that I learned a long time ago was when you're in a bad mood, it's time to look at what thoughts you are holding on to, what thoughts are going through your mind at the present time. It's really hard to be in a bad mood and be having good thoughts, happy thoughts, thoughts of gratitude and joy and so forth. And if you can stop when you're in a bad mood, look at those thoughts and then let go of them. It may be you have to replace them with a positive thought. Maybe you have to go, Om Mani Padme Hum, but do something and drop the negative thoughts because you're just punishing yourself. The more you hold on to them, the heavier they become and the worse your situation becomes. To finish it up, we are all surrounded with gifts of all kinds. And when we start recognizing that, we become filled with gratitude. The next is sickness, old age, grief, and loss, because this is part of life. This is something that I appreciate about Buddhism, is that they don't downplay this. It's like we really have to look at these things. This is the way things really work. Sickness and old age go hand in hand with birth and having a human body. Even with today's healthcare system, it's impossible to avoid sickness or the possibility of becoming sick. We just had COVID, pretty obvious. And the only way to avoid old age is to die before you get old. Usually, that's not a very good option. Grief and loss are related to someone else dying. Like everything else in life, it's most important how our mind responds to these difficult experiences. The Buddha's parents knew that sickness, old age, and death are powerful reminders of our situation, and they tried to keep him from seeing people experiencing any of these things. To a certain extent, American culture is very similar, that there is a denial of death. I performed a funeral recently, it was last fall, and it wasn't at a funeral home, it was a celebration of life center. Funeral home was not in the title at all. And the room where we had the funeral was set up with round tables. Everyone sat around a round table. And then after the funeral, they brought out catered meals. It was all very pleasant, but there really wasn't much that had to do with this poor person died. So denial is not an option. I saw a bumper sticker once at the prison parking lot that said, "Denial is not a river in Egypt." So it's not an alternative. Old people are frequently in nursing homes where we don't see them very often. Another saying that I find a little bit ironic is doctors save lives. If doctors save lives, then the person would never die, right? They prolong life. If you've noticed, my head is not quite on correctly, and I've been seeing a lot of doctors. And I'm always impressed with the publicity that they have, the pamphlets that they hand out. And there are always these smiling, healthy, younger looking people that are on the pamphlets. Even the old people are smiling and younger looking old people. Even the person that has lost their hair from chemotherapy looks pretty darn good in these pictures. Well, that isn't the way it works. Buddha said that these things are necessary for us to be aware of because they make life more precious. We realize that life is too precious to squander, that it's so easily lost. We want to avoid taking it for granted. So a healthy response to illness is taking responsibility for the suffering that illness causes you and experience it as an act of compassion. That illness gives us an opportunity to observe our mind, see how we can increase our suffering or decrease our mental suffering. I have said more than once that pain is unavoidable, suffering is optional. Yes, you can be sick and you can think about it and think about it and think about it and how miserable you are and how this could get worse and on and on and on. And needless to say, you suffer more and more and more. But if we apply mindfulness, awareness, contemplation, some self-examination, maybe mix it in with a little wisdom, this will really help reduce and eventually eliminate the suffering from illness. It's good to renounce some unrealistic expectations that we have of life. So illness contradicts three of our unrealistic expectations of life. One is I'm the most important person in the room, and illness kind of helps us remember that maybe we're not so important. Whenever I go to the clinic, it reminds me of what's bothering me doesn't seem to be very big compared to what's bothering some of these other people there. If we can step back and examine with a little more clarity, the illness becomes a reminder of impermanence and suffering, a reminder of how our mind works and how if we can tame our mind, the suffering decreases. And actually, if you start thinking about the suffering that these other people are having and wanting to do something to help them, to cheer them up, that can go a long way. This is something that I started doing. Last fall, I broke my ankle. And so I was going to the clinic a lot for other reasons, and I needed a wheelchair. And so I would have someone pushing the wheelchair for me. Frequently, it was a woman. So I would get this impish look on my face, turn around and say, I usually don't like it when women push me around, but I really like it when you are pushing me. And that would brighten their day. I even had one nurse at this one clinic that I go to regularly. I didn't do this to her, but on my way out, she said, I'm always so pleased to see when you come here because it brightens my day. I just feel so much better because I try to project a cheerful demeanor. And it can be very stressful, especially with COVID. It can be very, very stressful working in a clinic. So if we can start, you might say, spreading the joy around a little bit instead of thinking it's all about me, this can make a huge difference. Another unreasonable expectation is I should not be harmed in any way. Well, all beings want to be free of suffering, just like you. Yet they are subject to illness too. Nobody wants to be harmed by illness. We're all vulnerable. In today's world, diseases quickly spread and become pandemics. There's no safe place in the world. It's the way the world works. Life is uncertain and health is uncertain. It's unrealistic to feel that you are going to be going on and on and on and on and on and not experience illness, even serious illness. It's just unrealistic. The third one is life should be fair, and I'm the one that determines what's fair. So it's easy to think that life is unfair when you get a diagnosis of a disease that you don't want to get. But you don't think about how long have I lived before I got this diagnosis? What has my life been like before I got this diagnosis? How come I'm alive? Why didn't I die in an accident or something else? We don't usually ask those questions. We usually respond with, this shouldn't be happening to me. This is not fair. It's actually helpful from time to time to think about all the people that you know that have died, perhaps younger than you. So loving yourself means to take responsibility for your own happiness rather than expecting others or the world to be responsible for your happiness. One way then is the way you relate to your illness. You can be a victim, let's say, of cancer. You could be a cancer survivor, or you can be an experiencer of cancer. If you're a victim, you're defining yourself by the disease, and it's a very negative definition. If you're a survivor, you're defining yourself on the basis of the disease in a more positive way. If you're an experiencer of it, you realize that this is just a small group of experiences that you have had, and you have had an incredibly large amount of experiences throughout your life. So this is a way of getting some perspective. We don't have to define ourselves on the basis even of fatal illness. We're not the illness. We're much bigger than that. Now, karma has a big influence on illness, but it's wrong to say that I'm being punished by this illness. Karma is quite complex. It's cause and effect, and it's cumulative. It's a mixture of things. On the other hand, doing purification is good when you are sick, doing purification practices. Certainly, there are people in the world that have done worse things than you and accumulated much worse karma than you have had. So it's not really too helpful when you get sick going, oh, this proves that I've been a terrible person in this life or my past lives. It's better to have the attitude of, well, let's do some purification here and work with this in a positive way. So practices that are good for illness are Medicine Buddha, White Tara, Nyungne, Thousand Arm Chenrezig practice. Vajrasattva practice in Nundro is also a good purification practice. All of these things are good to do if you are a practicing Buddhist when you are ill. It's good also to make an effort as a patient to recover and be of benefit to the medical workers who help you. Again, what I have found, and this is one reason why I will make this joke about being pushed by a woman, is that the medical staff these days are incredibly stressed out. They're overworked. A lot of them, when COVID struck, resigned or retired early. And the patients are quite honestly more violent and difficult to deal with these days than they were 2-3 years ago. So it's good to be kind to the staff that are helping you, realize that they are there helping you, even if what they're doing to you might be uncomfortable. Wallowing in self-pity is just absolutely pointless and just creates more suffering. We need to focus our efforts on getting treated and doing what we can to recover from the illness. And our state of mind has a huge amount of bearing on recovering from the illness. I was surprised. I was hospitalized for a minor procedure, but had to spend a couple of nights in this hospital. And it was a newer hospital. It was built after 2000. And one of the services that they gave was you could get acupuncture at no cost. And every room in the hospital had a view of a natural setting. The hospital was called Woodwinds, and they had trees and forests and gardens, and every hospital room had a view of a natural setting. If you wanted a meal, you called up room service and you ordered from a menu, and they prepared it right then and brought it up to you rather than having it on a cart with 30 meals and just going down the rooms. So you got a freshly prepared meal. It turned out that they had consulted with high-end hotels in the design of this hospital. And they also had one of the TV channels was one that just had meditations on it. I watched one briefly, and it was a visualization, and they talked about visualizing your pain like the leaves on this tree. And then, of course, fall comes, the trees, leaves turn color, and then they fall to the ground. And doing these sorts of things has been proven scientifically to increase the speed of the recovery and the recovery results. So keep a positive attitude, renounce the causes of suffering, do these different practices if you can do them. You can even practice Tonglen, taking on the suffering of others and giving them your happiness. This takes away this self-centered me, I feel so sorry about me, because that just makes you unhappy. Why make yourself unhappy? So now about old age. Now, if we died when we were young, we wouldn't be able to grow old, and we wouldn't have the opportunities that growing old brings. When you get to my age, and I will be 78 in a couple of weeks. And I'd like to think that I gained a little bit of wisdom in those 78 years. So age can bring with it wisdom. since you're at Naropa, you've at least come in contact with the Dharma, and you've probably come in contact, at least heard Gyalwang Karmapa's name, and maybe other great masters. So it's pointless when you get old to feel that you're useless, you're unwanted, to feel sorry for yourself. Older people see things differently, but this is not a problem. An older person actually is in a very fortunate situation. When you're young, there are obstacles to listening and hearing, contemplating and practicing, that there's all kinds of things going on that keep you from doing that. In my own case, I was over 40 when I came in contact with the Dharma. So I spent over 40 years kind of wandering in the wilderness, bewildered and quite honestly suffering a lot. When we get older, we can realize the pitfalls of busyness and laziness. We can have more time to contemplate future lives, the possibility of death, karma, and so forth. And hopefully you have a little more free time to recite mantras, say prayers, and engage in other Dharma activities. It's also important to realize that everybody is aging, not just you, and avoid thoughts of poor me, poor me, poor me. I used to joke, and I still joke, but I used to say this joke. I don't say it so much anymore. How come everybody else is getting old and I'm not? But then I looked in the mirror one day. It's the responsibility of older people to share their experience with younger people, which is kind of what I'm doing tonight. An older person can tell younger people about their successes, their failures, attitudes to take, achievements, challenges, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of wisdom that older people have. So we need to remind ourselves of our good fortune that we've attained a precious human body. We've come in contact with the Dharma, and we have the best opportunity to practice now. Old age is normal and it's unavoidable. Do the best that you can to avoid regret and resentment for what you have done, and definitely avoid living in the past. That the past is past. It's like a rotten seed. Nothing can grow from it. What is important is in the present is how we affect where we're going in the future. So paying attention to what's going on in the present is very important. Accepting old age is important. Now, here I am, you might say, speaking from a direct experience, but this was in a book. Things get more difficult with age. Walking, cooking, even getting dressed, and I can attest for that. I put a grab bar in my shower. It's important to keep a positive state of mind and avoid negative thoughts and moods, and let go of them when you see them arise, because they just lead to suffering. And what's the point? Why suffer needlessly? The US culture values youth. I can't speak about other cultures, but definitely it values youth, and old age is considered bad. But we don't have to pay too much attention to that. I don't want to pay attention to a lot of the other ads either. We want to avoid getting deluded. Even if we have 1 month to live, we should be enthusiastic about it and use it as an opportunity to recite prayers, accumulate merit, and do practices. This is much more beneficial than wallowing in self-pity. Also, our mindset determines how we age. You can age much more quickly if you are stressed, if you're depressed, if you're angry, and so forth. And finally, the more we practice, the better we have at good outcomes after death in the Bardo and our next life. So, as I said in the previous talk, we need to recognize negative thinking through mindfulness, realize that there are plenty of difficulties in old age, but they're workable, that we can work with them in our mind and have much less pain and suffering. It's always important to cultivate loving kindness and compassion, always. Instead of anger or any other negative emotion, if we see it arising, replace it with loving kindness and compassion, whether it be anger towards yourself or anger towards other people. Forgiveness is an important part of working with anger, forgiving yourself. A lot of times we are the hardest person in the world to forgive. We are the hardest person in the world to love, to feel compassion for. It's easy to feel compassion for a puppy or for a neglected dog, but when it comes to ourselves, we just don't seem to have it. Well, we need to work on these feelings for ourselves. It's not self-indulgence. If we can't have it for ourselves, we really don't know what it is, and we can't have it for other people. It's good to contemplate the four ordinary foundations, which I started this whole series with, and I'm just going to go over them very briefly. We have taken a human birth in the human realm. We've come in contact with the Dharma. Our bodies are working. Our minds are fairly stable. We can meditate, we can learn, we can practice. We have a lot of things going on in our favor here in the human realm. And then we need to realize that it's something to be very valuable, very precious. And the second one, of course, is contemplating impermanence, that you don't know how long you will be alive and be able to practice. This is a remedy for laziness. The first contemplation is to motivate us to practice. So just realize that you don't know when your time of death will come. What brought me to the Dharma was when my best friend was killed instantly in an accident. He was healthy, very vibrant up until the time of the accident, but he was killed instantly. And that's a situation that we're in. You really never know. So now is the time to practice rather than thinking, oh, I'll do that later on. Contemplating karma means an understanding that our actions of body, speech, and mind will plant seeds that will sprout and grow and bear fruit. And that when we practice the Dharma, this is the best fruit. And when we practice non-Dharma, that is the worst fruit. So now is the time to plant virtuous seeds. Then the fourth one is contemplating the nature of samsara, being, suffering. And with this contemplation, we develop this aspiration to get to a pure land at the end of our lives, rather than not wanting to leave. A student of mine told me this story. She travels a lot from work-related travel. And on one flight, it was a particularly turbulent flight, so turbulent that she started doing Amitabha's mantra. You want to be reborn in Amitabha's pure land. And she developed this visualization of Amitabha. And it was the clearest visualization of Amitabha she ever had. And at that point, she told me, she went, oh, no, I'm not ready to go yet. But, not out loud, of course. But no, be ready to go. Don't fight it. Don't think, oh, I got to stay back here and mess around in samsara. So avoid that. Now, the last point that I'm going to talk about is grief and loss. As we go through life, it's unavoidable that family members and friends die. As I said, it was my best friend's death that actually led me to Buddhism. We can use these experiences to both benefit ourselves and benefit the people that have died and the people that have been left behind. So grief arises when someone we are attached to dies. A good definition of grief is deep mental anguish, deep sorrow. The greater the attachment, usually the greater the pain. Ordinarily, attachment makes us feel happy, makes us feel secure. But in this case, you might say the carpet has been pulled out from under us and we feel very insecure, very vulnerable, in a very painful state. We become focused on what we have lost, and there's no room to think of anything else, no space. The attachment causes you to be totally consumed by something or someone. So there's a difference between detachment and non-attachment. Detachment suggests an unfeeling indifference, whereas non-attachment is experiencing but the experience is not all about you. When there's an absence of attachment, healthy feelings have room to blossom. Non-attachment gives space to see things more clearly with more perspective. It works the same way for aversion, for pain, when you're sick or even dying. When someone dies, it can remind us of our own mortality, and aversion arises. An important part of working with death is to realize it's part of life. Whoever is born dies. It's not unnatural. It's not that you're being singled out or punished by a higher being when your father dies. A woman once came to the Buddha with her baby that had just died, and she wanted him to bring her baby back to life. The Buddha told her, "Bring me a mustard seed from a house that no one has died in." And the woman went frantically house to house looking for a mustard seed from a house that no one had died in. She eventually gave up because every house somebody had died in. She went back to the Buddha and she told the Buddha what she had learned, which is what the Buddha had intended her to learn, which is death is universal. There are 4 responses that we can have when someone close to us dies. We can say prayers for them. We can make offerings to the 3 jewels for them to have a good rebirth in Dewa Chen, or at least have a good rebirth in the human realm. You can request a lama to do a poa for the person. And of course, you can dedicate merit. So we're not powerless. We're not bereft of anything that we can do besides just grieve. It's good to focus on benefiting the other person who has died. Again, this takes the focus away from you and is putting it on the person that has died. We can be sad that their family and their friends are experiencing pain, and we can include them in our prayers. We can visit them. Just your presence gives comfort. Listening is important. Food is very important. Sharing food brings a lot of comfort. These are all things that can be done. A phone call, a card. If you're sad because you've lost a friend, the remedy is to remember that you are alive and can make new friends and have new relationships. The person who died has left everything behind. Again, they are the ones that your focus is on in terms of doing something for them. We also can be sad because a person's death reminds us of our own impermanence. So it's good to contemplate impermanence. It helps to see our situation and our perspective, and this helps us distinguish what is important and what is unimportant, what is trivial and what is not so trivial. These last 2 are about our own suffering. The loss happened in the past. We process it in the present, so there's room to grow in the future. So these are ways we can help others. Here is a quote by Chogyam Trungpa that I sometimes include in a condolence card. Death comes, obviously. You can never avoid death. Whatever you do, death occurs. But if you have lived with a sense of reality and with gratitude towards life, then you leave the dignity of your life behind you so that your relatives, your friends, and your children can appreciate who you were. So part of this is appreciating the person that has died. Here is a quote from Gyalwang Karmapa. This is a longer quote. This is more advice. Recall that the focus of your grief is the person you loved and perhaps the same person, and that same person and your love for them can relieve that sorrow. Actually, grief is rooted in the feeling of separation from that person you feel affection for, feeling of having lost him or her. You feel pain because you love them, yet that love connects you to them still, although they are gone. This continuity of love can also shape your response to losing them in a positive way. The person who died loved or at least cared deeply for you, and you loved them. Think this way: they wished for my happiness and tried to bring it about. Even as they were dying, that person surely kept with them their hope that I would be happy. They certainly did not want me to suffer. Their aspirations continue after they have gone. You can still work to fulfill those aspirations. Think that their hopes will now live on as part of me. By taking care of yourself and living a wise, happy life, you are honoring their aspirations. You are helping them take care of you and continuing your connection to them. When overcome with grief, remember that your beloved wants you to be happy every day and not suffer. The final thing that I want to say is to avoid survivor's guilt, which is thinking that you are in some way responsible for the death of that person. If you would have just done something differently, they would have not caught that illness, would not have been involved in that accident, or you caused them to be more miserable or whatever. That is confused thinking, just to put it simply. I'm going to bring up a poem that I wrote. I wrote this after my best friend, a different friend, died, and I titled it Questions After the Death of a Friend. Life is so precious, yet so easily lost. Friends are so precious, yet so easily lost. Health is so precious, yet so easily lost. Why squander such riches? Life is so uncertain. Possibilities and probabilities. No guarantee of being alive tomorrow. What do we really control? Are you grieving for the loss others suffered? Are you grieving for the loss you have suffered? Are you grieving because you feel you could be next? When grieving, why not grieve clearly? The loss was in the past. If you are next, it's in the future. Why let happiness or unhappiness hinge on history or mystery? Savor the experience of living. Life is full of sorrows and joys. Allow yourself to experience both. Can you let them go?